YouTube. The most overwhelming feeling in the world? Sonder? Lock in.
Around the year 1558, the Flemish artist Peter Bruegel the Elder painted what appears at first glance to be a rather calm, mundane scene. The painting is titled Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. In the foreground, a farmer is intently focused on plowing his field. A shepherd leans lazily on his staff, gazing up at the clouds. A beautifully rendered merchant ship glides across a calm, sunlit sea. It is a portrait of ordinary life, continuing at its own quiet, relentless pace. But if one looks very closely at the bottom right corner of the canvas, thrashing wildly in the green water, there's a pair of pale, desperate legs. This is Icarus, the boy of Greek myth who strapped wings of wax and feather to his back, defied the laws of gods and men.
Sure, I've never heard about this, y'all, so I'm very intrigued. I'll try to commentate because the last video I didn't commentate as much, but this video it's gonna be hard too. Sonder, I believe Sonder is the experience, the feeling. Or I'm not gonna get it's not gonna be 100%, but the feeling or the knowing that everyone has a unique own life, if that makes sense. Let me look that up, chat. What do y'all think? I was correct. Sonder is the profound realization that every random pass by is a living life as vivid and complex as our own. It is a self-awareness that you are just a background extra in thousands of other people's stories, each filled with their own ambitions, worries, and routines. That is very a unique thing for me. I think my bigger, my big word thing that hit me hard was no return, and I think that is the wanting to get out after it, the wanting to travel or to leave after a traumatic or a very impactful moment or event. Continuing.
Men flew too close to the sun and fell from the heavens. It is one of the most famous devastating tragedies in all of Western mythology, and yet in Bruegel's masterpiece, nobody cares. The farmer doesn't break his stride, the shepherd doesn't look down, the ship sails on. A cosmic tragedy is occurring just a few feet away, but to the farmer, the most important thing in the universe is the dirt beneath his plow. Icarus is not the main character of this painting. He's merely a brief, barely noticeable splash in the background of the farmer's day. In the winter of 1938, the poet W.H. Auden stood in the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, staring at this exact painting. It struck him so deeply that he wrote a poem about it, realizing that the old masters understood something we didn't about human suffering, that it is fundamentally lonely. A tragedy is only a world-ending event to the person experiencing it. To the rest of the world, it is nothing more than another day. Bruegel's painting captures a deeply unsettling reality about the architecture of human consciousness. Human storytelling has always relied on the same unyielding hierarchy. There is the protagonist, and then there is everything else. To exist in a human body is to be locked inside a first-person perspective, serving as the undisputed narrator, hero, and focal point of a sprawling, epic narrative. Everyone else is inherently perceived as a background character, extras rendering in real time just to populate the scenery of a single central life. In biology, there is a concept called the Umwelt. It suggests that every living organism is trapped in its own unique sensory bubble.
Wow.
A tick, a bat, and a human being can occupy the same exact physical space in a forest, but they are living in entirely different, non-overlapping universes.
Yeah. I think about how oftentimes I think about that is how it's in a way like your life is only as big as so far as big as you travel. If that makes sense. Let me rephrase it. Right, your experiences, everything that you expect, go through life is only how far like you physically drive or whatever. And I mean that in the sense that there's I think when people get older or you get a job, and it's where people oftentimes think life kind of gets stale. It's their life, their experiences are only that work, that drive to work. Like I think of it as a map, and if you were to see like where they're constantly going, that like that, the line of them going to work or driving to the Walmart to get food or wherever it is, that is where their life like that's where their experiences are. Like if that makes sense, that's where like outside of that, the it isn't like they're. I mean, does that make sense, y'all? I feel like I was cooking for a second and I totally lost my momentum. Uh, but it's the same thing with this. How someone can be like right next to you, and just because them taking a right, their experience can be completely different than you. I think going like I remember the differences between like going to different jobs, like how each atmosphere is so different. Like it's weird. It's like even though I'm only maybe X amount of miles, like 7 miles away, the experience and people I know and everything I learn is completely different. And I think that's the same thing with this forest. Is while they're all in one humans and everything is just in that one place due to there being a difference, right? That take in its purpose and the size, its thing is completely different than the human. YouTube, let me know if I'm cooking or if I'm just being stupid.
Dictated by what their senses can perceive. Human beings are subjected to an emotional and psychological umwelt. In developmental psychology, children must actively learn theory of mind, the intellectual realization that other people hold different thoughts, secrets, and perspectives than they do. But a human being never truly outgrows their innate egocentric bias. The brain simply cannot sustain the emotional weight of absolute empathy, and so it retreats to the only perspective it can truly access. It retreats into the ego. The ego convinces the mind that it is being observed. It assumes that the world is paying attention. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. In the year 2000, researchers at Cornell University conducted a study where subjects were forced to wear an embarrassing t-shirt into a crowded room. The subjects were universally convinced that the majority of the room was judging them. In reality, practically no one even noticed what they were wearing. We all believe we are Icarus. We believe our falls, our awkward mistakes, and our triumphs are massive, eliminated events being witnessed by the world. We project our
Yeah, I've been there multiple times where uh, I used this in the past video, and it's going on again, but I remember something that I remember that wasn't a sentence. I remember being at a skate park and you'd fall off your board, or younger me, but I remember you fall off your board, or you hurt yourself in some way, and it feels like everyone is just staring at you. When in reality, it's like no one's really, it's not that people don't care. It's just like it's so common, like it's not that big of a deal as we think it is.
own main character syndrome onto a backdrop of extras. The brutal, humbling truth is that everyone else in the room is the farmer, entirely focused on their own plow, obsessed with the dirt beneath their own feet, just like we are. But occasionally, looking up at the lit windows of an apartment building or noticing a face in the background of an old photograph, a psychological glitch occurs. The camera momentarily pulls back, floating higher and higher until the individual ego is reduced to a microscopic speck. Sonder was the word John Koenig chose to describe the specific crushing psychological vertigo. And for a feeling so universally relatable, it is almost astonishing that it lacked a name until 2012. He defines it as the profound sudden realization that each random passerby has a life as vivid and complex as one's own. It is the jarring awareness that every single person on earth is living a story of their own, complete with their own ambitions, friends, routines, crushing failures, and secret tragedies. The realization that an anonymous face in a crowd is the center of a universe that is completely inaccessible, an endless web of intertwined plots in which the observer does not even feature as a footnote. It is a terrifying concept because it exposes the severe limits of human compassion. The mind is not a machine built to handle the emotional bandwidth of 8 billion protagonists. Anthropologists point to Dunbar's number, the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom a human can maintain stable social relationships, usually hovering around 150. Beyond that number, the human brain begins to aggressively compress the data. Neurological studies focusing on in-group versus out-group perception have shown that the brain processes strangers with less neural complexity. It is an automatic subconscious downgrading of another being's humanity. People cease to be complete multidimensional entities and become statistics, demographics, or scenery. This is why humanity is plagued by the identifiable victim effect, the phenomenon where society will weep over the tragedy of one single named person but remain entirely emotionally numb to a statistic detailing the suffering of millions. To feel the pain of millions is to invite a psychological collapse. Sonder is the sensation of that protective dam momentarily breaking. This emotional disconnect wasn't always so severe. For most of human history, people lived in small tribal groups where Dunbar's number was sufficient. But then came the Industrial Revolution, and the quiet villages were traded for concrete jungles. In 1903, the sociologist George Simmel wrote a foundation essay titled The Metropolis and Mental Life. He wanted to understand what happened to the human psyche when it was suddenly forced to exist in the bustling, overwhelming chaos of the modern city. Simmel argued that the endless barrage of stimuli, the noise, the speed, and the sheer volume of the faces passing by threatened to tear the nervous system apart. In response, city dwellers were forced to develop what he called a blasé attitude, a psychological shield of deliberate indifference. The brain intentionally dulls its own reactions, turning human beings into gray, meaningless shapes just to avoid sensory overload. It is the sociology behind the NPC, the non-playable character. The modern human walking through a subway station during rush hour, stepping past a weeping stranger, is not inherently malicious. They are merely surviving the metropolis. They are experiencing
Yeah, they're trying to get by, man. That's a big thing. That was a huge thing, man. I really feel people get treated differently because of that.
during rush hour, stepping past a weeping stranger is not inherently malicious. They are merely surviving the metropolis. They are experiencing de-individuation, the terrifying phenomenon where the crowd erases the individuality of everyone inside it, turning 1,000 complex novels into a single roaring wall of white noise. Yet there has always been a quiet rebellion against this biological and sociological numbness. If the brain is built to ignore Sonder, art and literature are designed to forcefully induce it. The Roman poet Virgil introduced the phrase, the tears of things. It is the idea that there is a structural sorrow embedded in the very fabric of existence, a shared silent burden carried by everything that lives. To recognize this burden in strangers is the highest calling of the artist. In the 19th century, the French poet Charles Baudelaire championed the idea of the flâner, the urban wanderer who moves through the city specifically to absorb the invisible lives passing by, to read the faces of the crowd like the pages of a vast tragic book. Across the ocean, Walt Whitman stood on a deck of a Brooklyn ferry, staring into the water and the faces of the commuters around him. In his poetry, he attempted an impossible magic trick to collapse time itself. He addressed his words not just to the people beside him, but to strangers who would stand in the exact spot hundreds of years in the future, recognizing that their internal words would be identical to his own. And in Russia, Anton Chekhov built an entire literacy legacy as an exercise in Sonder. He wrote plays completely devoid of traditional extras. In a Chekhov play, the servant clearing the table has a soul, a heartbreak, and an interior just as complex as the wealthy aristocrat agonizing in the center of the room. Today, Google Street View accidentally created a vast archive of background characters. Clicking down a random digital highway in a foreign country, one encounters the accidental portraits of strangers frozen midlife, figures waiting for a bus, carrying groceries, mid-conversations, forever trapped in a forgotten afternoon from 2014. Their faces are blurred by algorithms capturing a specific mundane second that no longer exists. They are digital ghosts, accidental monuments to lives that will never be fully known, yet are undeniably real, in a way that the image insists upon without being able to prove. When the realization of Sonder truly takes hold, it brings with it an undeniable existential vertigo. It hurts the ego to realize that one is not the protagonist of objective reality. It hurts to look at a lifetime of carefully curated memories, defining moments and deep personal traumas, and realize that to the rest of the universe, they are just ripples in someone else's background.
Yeah, it's hard to. That's a big thing, man. Like when I remember when I was younger, you go through things and you're like, man, this is such a huge thing, not just for me, but for everyone. Like I remember thinking when I tell someone that, I remember thinking it would be such a big thing. I mean, the reality is, oftentimes you tell these things to people, and usually they'll forget, man. They either forget or it's like they just don't really care. Ain't nothing wrong with that, right? Because everyone goes through stuff. Uh, but there's definitely a moment where, like, man, it does hurt realizing that these giants in your life are droplets in someone else's.
It is the dread of insignificance. It is the quiet, creeping fear that human life is merely a drop of water returning to a vast, dark ocean. The ego violently recoils from the scale. It wants the tragedy of Icarus to stop the farmer in his tracks. It demands that the universe pay attention. But the ocean does not care about the drop. It simply absorbs it. And yet, right at the very bottom of that despair, there's a floor. If the mind stops fighting the current, if one simply sits with the total discomfort of being unspecial, the existential vertigo begins to settle. The exhaustion of mattering fades away, and the sheer terror of Sonder slowly transmutes into something entirely different, a radical, intoxicating sense of relief. Much of modern anxiety is rooted in the exhausting performance of the self. Society trains individuals to believe they are constantly being perceived, evaluated, and measured against the grand narrative of history. There is a suffocating pressure to be memorable, to succeed, to leave a permanent scar on the earth. People carry the heavy, invisible armor of their own self-importance, terrified of falling from the sky because they assume the world has its eyes fixed upon them. But Sonder reveals this beautiful, liberating truth. The audience simply doesn't exist. Everyone is entirely too busy staring in their own epic narrative to critically evaluate the performance of an extra. If every
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. A lot of times when I've seen both sides of it, though. I think people who have absolutely nothing going on with their life will overdo it. Right? I run into certain people where if someone eats their food wrong or just glances at them twice, they have such a blame, right? They have nothing going for them, and I'm not hating on them, but I'm not talking about this person who's barely getting by and who's struggling, right? And who's trying to survive. I'm talking about the person who is too afraid to live, or too, no, I mean, too afraid to live. I mean, too afraid to be themselves, right? Who tries to fit in with the social norms, right? And and they so like they have they're so like they're so stuck to that, and so like I mean, not not if it's not this, then it's not right. If they're so stuck to that, when anyone does anything that they think is off, they judge it exponentially. Like it's like they have what you call it, a no, not a microphone. What you call it? A zoom. Y'all know what I'm talking about? The thing you microglass. I can't even think of it, but it's like they have a big old camera, and someone else does anything, and then they critique it to an amount that is overdoing it by a lot. So I think there's both of that. I think there's the person that critiques anything, and takes everything to heart by a mile, and there's the person he's talking about where if you drop your food out in the middle of public, or I don't know, you hit cringe, you do a dance that's considered cringe or whatever. The other person, the guy he's talking about, it looks at it and goes, "Oh, I mean, okay." He goes and continues on about their day. Not because they're not that because they don't care. Not it's not this guy has nothing for him, or I don't I just don't it's not in a disrespectful way. It's more of like I have so much on my plate already. This just doesn't affect me. Like I have whatever it may be, right? Bills, family members, hospital, like et cetera, whatever it could be.
Everyone is trapped in their own story. The pressure is entirely off. The agonizing weight of being perceived vanishes. A mistake is just a mistake. A failure will not echo through eternity because eternity is simply too crowded with other people's noise to notice. Sonder is not a demotion from the center of the universe. It is an invitation to finally join the rest of humanity. We are all carrying the incomprehensible weight of an entire universe inside our heads, walking past each other in subway stations, pretending it's perfectly normal. We are all Icarus falling from the sky in our own private tragedies, and we are all the farmer keeping our heads down, doing our best to tend to the dirt of our daily lives. To look
Yeah,
at a stranger and truly see them, to acknowledge the invisible weight they carry, is to forgive oneself for being small. It is the realization that while a single life may just be a brief, unnoticed splash in the corner of a painting, the canvas is infinitely large, and every single inch of it is painted with the exact same beautiful, desperate colors.
W Vid man.